Greetings, YouTube. Today we're looking at Cagney, the authorized biography written by Doug Warren with James Cagney himself. And this was written while Mr. Cagney was still alive, um, right after he had filmed Ragtime, which is, I believe, his second to last film. And here's a picture of him in his older age. And apparently he was a major fan of horses and wanted to be a farmer from a very young age. Um, it was weird reading this in some ways because when he was like 10 or 11, he went to Flatbush, which was farm country when he was that age. He was born in 1899, so it was 1909, 1910, and it was farm country, and he loved the concept of being on a farm. And eventually, he owned he owned a ranch in California and then two farms, one in Martha's Vineyard and one in the Berkshires of New York State, which was 750 acres. I think it's at its peak. And he kept lots of horses. He kept beef cattle. He kept livestock of all varieties. He was really into farming, which I thought was kind of cool. And he was into having not a palatial home. His home was like 6, 7 rooms in a very rustic style. And he didn't entertain a lot. His circle of friends was very small, very intimate. He didn't let many people into it. And as he got older, no one was let into it. I think the last person that might have been let into it was Jack Lemmon. And the inner circle got the nickname of the Irish Mafia, which is a little weird because not everyone in the group was Irish. In fact, Mr. Cagney himself was only half Irish. He was also Norwegian. But someone once asked, a young actor once asked, how do you get into the Irish Mafia? And one of the members looked at him and said, they were at a restaurant, and they said, you have to be asked. And another one of them, without missing a beat, looked at him and said, and we're all out of asks. Which was a wonderful, wonderful line. But this covers his entire life, from his earliest age, little sketches of his parents, all the way up through 1984, which is a long run. He died in 86. And he was married for 64 years to the same woman. That's fascinating. They never had any children of their own. They did adopt 2 children, though, a boy, James Cagney Jr., and a girl, Carolyn, I believe her name is. Both of which probably did very well because his brother was in charge of his finances and apparently was really good at it. Some people say that, in fact, when Mr. Cagney died, his brother may have been worth more money. But James Cagney was a man of his own desires. He always thought of himself as a song and dance man, not an action star, not a gangster. But he had a tough New York city street fighter vibe because he was a street fighter, a literal street fighter. He got into street fights all the time. Bare knuckles, knock down, drag out street fights. And he was good at it. And when he did fight scenes in films, he thought of that as another form of dancing, particularly when he was playing a character that boxed. He loved that kind of thing. And in his youth, he was incredibly agile, an incredible dancer, able to pick up moves quickly. And I'm not just saying it because he said it, but other people did too. He had a very good memory for things. He'd see something once and he'd remember it. Otherwise known as he'd steal every single step he could lay his eyes on. His father was an alcoholic. He was, for many years, what would be called a maintenance drinker. An alcoholic that could drink, but was able to still hold down a job. But as a maintenance drinker, he drank almost half a gallon of rye a day. A day. It's a good thing he was a bartender for most of his life. Eventually, the alcoholism got the better of him. He spent less and less time with his family and eventually got gravely ill. His alcoholism was contributing to the fact that his immune system was absolute crap and died at a fairly young age. But his family always stuck together. There were 5 children in total, 4 boys and a girl. Jean was the youngest. 2 children did not survive. One died as an infant at 3 weeks, and one died at 13 months. And that one broke Mr. Cagney's heart. And in fact, when he had to bring up the memory of something sad for a film, that's what he would bring up. And he would cry every single time on cue. And they weren't fake tears. He viewed acting as a job, but he was good at it. And I've seen a number of his films. I think two of my favorites of his are Yankee Doodle Dandy and Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts was when he was an older gentleman, not old, but he was beyond his dancing prime at that point. And he basically did the film because it was going to be a tropical holiday. He didn't have a huge amount of screen time, but it was a great vehicle for Jack Lemmon and for Henry Fonda, who I didn't realize it had been a play until I read this. I didn't know it had been a play. And Henry Fonda apparently had played it for a number of years, played the character on stage. That was kind of cool. Mr. Cagney did a lot of theater, so he cut his teeth on that. He did a lot of vaudeville, and he loved being a vaudevillian. The book read very quickly. It was captivating. The author really drew you in. I didn't want to stop reading the chapters. He carried you along. And a lot of the book is the author's, Mr. Warren, but Cagney comes through. And he pops up again and again and again to talk about things that only he could directly from his personal experience. And he admits that, like, his memory isn't perfect. You know, and they just occasionally, the author and Mr. Cagney disagree on points. And who knows who's right? It was being written when he was an older man about things that happened 40 years, 50 years in the past. Mr. Cagney donated a lot of his money to his mother. He took care of her for her entire life. They all pitched in. He helped put his brothers through medical school when he could. He didn't have enough money to help the oldest, but he was able to help the second. Two of them became doctors. And all of them eventually moved out to California and became involved in one way or the other with Hollywood. One of the brothers became an actor briefly and then went on to become one of his manager and a financial advisor. His sister became an actress. Eventually, she left the business, but she was in a number of films with Mr. Cagney. And while he was best remembered as a gangster, that's not how Mr. Cagney saw himself. But I think one of the best aspects of Mr. Cagney is that he fought the contract system of Hollywood. Because at the time, you were contracted to a studio, and in the early days, you worked 7 days a week, putting out maybe 20 films in a year, cranking them out, boom, 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 like a assembly line. And when Mr. Cagney got to the point where he was like, I've had this, I'm just going to go back to New York, he walked. And eventually, the studio blinked, and he got a better contract. And they tried putting pressure on him again, and he walked again. And the studio blinked, and he got a better contract. And he was one of the key people that helped the actors organize, so they had better, safer working conditions. Because when he was working on the early films, when there was someone firing a Thompson machine gun at the actors, it wasn't squibs. It was an actual Thompson machine gun firing real live rounds. So he was part of the effort to make things safer, to get better working hours, to make sure that they weren't being crushed, getting weekends off. And whenever he was doing a film, when it was near the end of the film shooting, he would often call in sick at least once or twice. Why? So the crew could get another day's pay. He never forgot who was important. He never forgot the crew members. He knew what it was like to grind out your living in Hollywood and entertainment on the stage and in vaudeville. He knew what that was like, and he never forgot it. He remembered being hungry, and he never let that leave his mind. And for that, I have nothing but endless respect for the man. He never forgot the little guy. He never forgot that he had been a little guy. And that kind of humility is something that we don't see a lot in Hollywood nowadays. I don't know if Mr. Cagney would be real happy with the way Hollywood has turned out. but he fought for workers' rights and for better pay, and he was a political progressive. And this book made me like Mr. Cagney on a whole new level. So I really do recommend this book. I'm gonna actually go check out Doug Warren and see what else he has written. I know he wrote articles, so I'm gonna see maybe he wrote any other biographies, because he's very good at this. He has a wonderful style. I really enjoyed myself. So if you are a fan of James Cagney and would like to know more about his life from his perspective, here you go.